Dax Wilder suddenly woke up. A deep silence ruled the night, sending chills down his spine. The room was dark, with only the dim light from the night lamp illuminating the walls. He reached out to check the spot where Lena should have been lying next to him, but he found no warmth from his wife. The emptiness he felt began to slowly morph into panic. His heart raced. He called out for Lena, but received no answer. For a moment, the thought, maybe she's with Jake, tried to ease his mind, but the deep silence spreading through the house whispered that something was wrong. He quickly got out of bed and headed for the hallway. As he moved toward his son, Jake's room, the darkness seemed to swallow his steps. Dax's years of military experience had taught him to always expect the worst. If there was a threat, he wouldn't hesitate to act. When he reached Jake's room, he slowly opened the door. A faint orange light seeping in from the bedroom door barely illuminated the room. He took a quick step towards the bed but didn't see Jake's small body there. The bed was empty. This moment felt like a turning point for Dax. A difficult-to-describe void and fear filled him. Jake was lost, just like Lena. Neither of them was home. Just a few hours ago, they had all been together, and everything was as it should be. But now, Dax was trapped in an immense emptiness, unable to find his son and wife. In a panic, he began to search the rest of the house, looking into every room, checking every corner. There was nothing. Everything seemed arranged as if they had never existed. The doors were locked, the windows closed. There were no signs of any struggle outside. How could this be? As Dax got lost in these questions, he spotted a piece of paper on the kitchen counter. His throat tightened. He quickly reached for the paper and found a message written in Lena's handwriting. "You took everything from me. Now I am taking from you." As this sentence echoed in Dax's mind, he noticed a photograph beneath it. His hands trembled as he picked up the photo, and the sight before him nearly paralyzed him. In the picture, Lena and Jake were in a dark room, their hands and mouths bound. There was a look of fear in their eyes. At that moment, Dax was experiencing the most horrifying moment of his life. This was not just a kidnapping. It was a declaration of personal war. When he looked at the back of the photo, he saw a scribbled number he didn't recognize. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the photo, but his mind was racing. He paused for a moment and took a deep breath. No matter how terrifying the situation was, he couldn't give in to panic. This was an instinct ingrained in him from years of training and combat experience. He needed to stay calm first, and then plan what to do next. However, his identity as a father urged him to act quickly. No matter who the enemy was, they had gone too far by targeting his family, and they would pay for it. He grabbed his phone, considering calling one of his military contacts to track the number. However, he felt there was a trap in this. There had to be a way to find this person, and perhaps the biggest clue was right in front of him. He looked closely at the photo again. He saw a familiar object in the background, but he couldn't quite figure out where it belonged. After focusing for a while, he was sure he had seen this detail before. The enemy could be closer than he thought. Dax needed to take action without wasting any time. A war had begun, and he had very little time to get his family back. He picked up his phone again and immediately reached out to track the number. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. Dax reread the message that appeared on his phone screen. "Return to the starting point, Wilder. You have only 12 hours to find me." His heart began to race. What did starting point mean? Was it someone who knew him? The enemy had drawn him into a game by kidnapping his family, and now they were leaving a clue in Dax's mind. Dax quickly opened his computer. He activated the tracking programs he had used during his time as a combat pilot. He was trying to identify the source of the incoming message, but it had been sent from fake numbers. Tracking down his enemy would be more difficult than he thought. At that moment, a memory surfaced in his mind. The Ruben Cortez operation from years ago. That mission, in which he had taken down a drug cartel, was a turning point in his career. Cortez had been captured, but some of his men had managed to escape. Was the starting point connected to that operation? Could one of Cortez's men have returned for revenge? Just then, another message arrived on his phone. Coordinates: 40.748817, negative 73.985428. He opened a map and entered the coordinates. The location was an old abandoned warehouse area 2 hours away from downtown. This warehouse had been used for military operations years ago. Was the enemy sending him a message by choosing this place from the past? Dax quickly sprang into action. He grabbed a few essential pieces of equipment and jumped into his car. Time was running out, and the enemy had only given him 12 hours. Keeping his eyes on the road, his mind focused on who the enemy could be. Was it Ruben Cortez and his men? Or was it an entirely different threat? Without any concrete information about the enemy, he was heading straight into a trap. By the time Dax arrived at the warehouse, it was dark. The surroundings were silent. Only the sound of the wind could be heard. He pulled over and carefully examined the area. The warehouse hadn't been used in a long time, but it was clear that something was going on here. Before entering, he looked through the glass next to the door. It was completely dark inside. Cautiously, he opened the door and stepped inside. As he moved through the warehouse, a small box left on a table caught his attention. There was a note attached to the box. "There's a clue inside that you're looking for." When Dax opened the box, a map came out. The map marked another location in the city, but it was much farther away. At the bottom of the map, the following sentence was written: "You have no other choice." Desperately, Dax took the map in his hand. As he looked at the map, his phone vibrated again. This time, the incoming message contained a short video. When the video started, Dax's breath caught in his throat. Lena and Jake were bound and facing the camera. At that moment, he realized once again how ruthless the enemy was. Before the video ended, the following sentence appeared on the screen: "Make your choice. Time is running out." Dax was focused on the terrified faces of Lena and Jake in the final moments of the video. The threat that appeared on his phone screen echoed in his mind. "If you make the wrong choice, you will lose them." Time was quickly running out, and he was now at the center of this game. He had to make a decision. However, making that decision was much harder than he had thought. For a moment, he lost himself, his mind drifting back to pivotal moments in his life. The tough decisions he had made during his years as a combat pilot, moments that had saved lives or led to death, all seemed to converge at this point. The enemy had drawn him here, and now every move was under their control. Dax needed to figure out how to handle this game. He glanced at the map in his hand once more. The marked location indicated a desolate area outside the city. Going there could mean falling into a trap. But there was no other option. Lena and Jake's lives depended on it. He hesitated for a moment. What did the enemy want? Why had this game become so complicated? If this was Ruben Cortez's doing, he would undoubtedly use his past to send a message. But Cortez had been captured years ago. This could be a different threat. Dax pulled his weapon from his pocket and checked it slowly. He needed to be more cautious now. His instincts could help him predict the enemy's next move. So far, everything had felt like a game. But this game had turned into a personal battle for Dax. His mind was filled with many questions, but each one focused on a single truth. He had to save Lena and Jake. No matter how clever and calculated the enemy was, Dax was just as determined. He got into his car to head to the location marked on the map and started the engine. As he sped through the darkness of the night, the tension within him grew. The only thing he thought about along the way was whether he was making the right decisions. The enemy's aim was not just a physical threat. They were also trying to break him psychologically. They wanted to muddle his mind with messages, videos, and images of Lena and Jake. But Dax would not fall into this trap. Even though it seemed the enemy was in control, he had to find a way out. He checked his watch. Only 7 hours were left. He had time to figure out the enemy's move during this time, but he also needed to make his own plan. Going to the marked location might just be the beginning. Once he got there, he could find more clues or possibly face a trap. No matter what, he could not risk Lena and Jake's lives. As Dax approached the marked point, he began to observe his surroundings more carefully. This place used to be an abandoned industrial area. It was filled with factories and warehouses that had not been used for years. In the darkness of the night, it resembled a ghost town. He slowly pulled over and prepared his weapon as he stepped outside. Dax turned around and prepared to wait, ready for whatever might come. He felt a fear inside him, but he also carried a sense of courage. He knew what the enemy was capable of. He didn't expect to confront him, but he had to risk everything to save Lena and Jake. The door opened, and a silhouette appeared. Dax braced himself to see who his enemy was. At that moment, he waited, hoping to find the answer to all his questions. Chapter 5. As Dax focused on the silhouette of his enemy, the fear inside him suddenly turned into determination. Knowing who was in front of him gave him confidence. At that moment, he questioned the enemy and the power behind him. Everything was leading up to this confrontation. There was a void in the enemy's eyes. Dax promised himself he wouldn't get lost in that void. The silhouette became clearer with each step it took. Dax was confronted with a familiar face. The enemy was Anton, a remnant from a past war, Dax's adversary. Both were former war pilots, and the anger in Anton's eyes had never faded since the day the war ended. Dax realized that this confrontation did not frighten him. On the contrary, it was an opportunity to win his own battle. "What did you plan to pull me here for, Anton?" Dax asked in a lowered voice. The enemy responded with a cruel smile. "I had a good plan, but I didn't expect a man as brave as you. You came here to find your son and wife, didn't you?" Dax tried to hide his tension. "Let them go. They're not part of this game," he replied. Anton shook his head mockingly. "Ah, but that's where you're wrong. They are the most important pieces of this game. Without them, this story doesn't complete." Thoughts of Lena and Jake's condition constantly revolved in Dax's mind. Time was limited, and every passing second could push him into a more difficult situation. Trying to remain calm, Dax asked, "What do you want to let them go?" Anton responded mockingly, arms spread wide. "I want you to risk your entire life, Dax. Seeing you scared makes me happy. But this could be an opportunity for you." These words sparked a flame within Dax. He had to move beyond the fear. Anton's aim was to scare and manipulate him. Dax had to refuse to play this game. "I'm not afraid," Dax said, his voice resonating with firm determination. "If you let them go, I'll respond to whatever happens to you. But if you don't, I'll do whatever it takes to stop you." The shock on Anton's face increased Dax's confidence. The enemy seemed hesitant, because he was confronted with unexpected courage. "You can't threaten me, Dax. I'm the lord of this place. I control everything," Anton said, but paused for a moment when he saw the determination in Dax's eyes. Dax sensed his enemy's weakness. It was an advantage for him. "You should try that, Anton. But remember, this time you're not alone," Dax added, feeling a surge of power within. At that moment, fear replaced the void in his enemy's eyes. Anton realized what kind of threat Dax posed. He immediately turned to flee, but Dax stepped forward to stop him. He moved quickly to seize his enemy, but just then another figure entered through a door. Dax's heart stopped for a moment. Knowing that Lena and Jake were in danger caused a surge of panic. The new figure was a dark silhouette and appeared ready to thwart Dax's plan by standing beside the enemy. "You've come this far, Dax, but you have a long way to go," he said, distracting Dax and giving Anton the chance to escape. "No!" Dax shouted, but it was too late. As Anton fled, he turned to Dax with a smile and left a parting remark. "This is a game, Dax, and I always win." Dax felt a growing anger as he watched his enemy vanish. He had lost time, and the safety of Lena and Jake was at stake. Dax decided to take action to pursue his enemies. No matter what the enemy's strategy was, he couldn't lose his determination to reach them. Their lives were in his hands, and this time he was ready to fight with all his strength. Chapter 6. As Dax stepped in the direction where Anton's dark silhouette had vanished, the anger and fear in his heart intertwined. His mind was racing with hundreds of thoughts. He knew time was working against him. The panic inside him grew because he didn't know where Lena and Jake were. I need to find them, Dax thought, renewing his determination. Outside, the darkness of the night had shrouded everything, and the streets had grown desolate. Dax carefully scanned his surroundings, reviewing every detail to track down Anton. Knowing the tactics Anton had used in previous battles, he was aware he wouldn't make the same mistake this time. The reality that his enemy might be one step ahead filled him with constant anxiety. Dax recalled watching footage from a security camera a few days earlier, showing Anton's workplace. This was a place his enemy frequented. Dax decided that this should be his first target. He needed to think through every detail to predict his enemy's escape route. Moving swiftly, he managed to use a secret passage beside the old hangar to exit from the back. His heart raced. The thrill and fear of tracking his enemy intertwined with each step. As he stepped outside the hangar, he noticed a dark figure moving. Dax approached cautiously to get a better look. It was Mike, Anton's right-hand man, and someone Dax knew. Mike was hiding in the shadows, observing the surroundings. Dax approached him and whispered, "Where are they?" Mike jumped back, startled by Dax's sudden appearance. "Dax! What are you doing here?" he said, his voice filled with panic. "I didn't come for you. I need to follow Anton. Do you know where he is?" Dax looked at Mike with determination in his eyes. After a moment's thought, Mike understood what Dax was focused on. "Yes, but knowing his safe spots is difficult. Anton always plans ahead," he replied. "I know, but I have no other choice. We need to buy ourselves some time," Dax said. After a few seconds of hesitation, Mike nodded. "Okay, but we're taking a risk. Both of us could get in trouble." Dax nodded in agreement with Mike's suggestion. The two set off to track Anton. Dax moved forward, constantly checking his surroundings. His eyes searched for clues of his enemy's trail. The thought that Lena and Jake might be in danger motivated him even more. As they moved slowly, Mike gave Dax a hint. Anton likes to use not only dark places, but also old friends. There might be a trap waiting for us. Dax internalized this information and doubled his attention. They had to be cautious, as Anton could be watching them at any moment. After a while, they approached an old warehouse. Dax recalled that this was a place Anton often visited. Before entering, he decided they needed a plan. "He might set a trap here. We need to see what's inside first," Dax said. Mike nodded, indicating he agreed with Dax's plan. "I'll scout inside. You wait outside. If anything happens, come immediately." Dax admired Mike's bravery. "Be careful," he said, trying to hide his anxiety. Mike slowly opened the door to the warehouse and stepped into the darkness inside. Dax stayed back and carefully closed the door. While waiting, he listened intently. The sounds coming from inside made him increasingly uneasy. He felt that something could erupt at any moment. As time passed, his heart began to race. He wondered if Mike would return. After a while, Dax's attention was drawn by the sound of the door opening. Mike burst outside in a panic. "Dax, we need to go! Anton is here," he said. Dax struggled to overcome his fear and asked, "What happened?" Mike was out of breath. "There's a group of men waiting for him over there. We need to hurry." Dax moved without wasting any time. The safety of Lena and Jake was more important than anything else. "Then let's go," Dax said, urging them both to retreat quickly. As they stepped outside, the warrior spirit inside him awakened once more. He was ready to fight with all his strength to confront his enemy and save his loved ones. Chapter 7. Dax and Mike quickly retreated toward the shadowy area beside the warehouse. Dax was filled with adrenaline. With every step, he considered where their enemies might be, and felt ready to risk everything for the safety of Lena and Jake. The darkness of the night forced them to move stealthily. But as time passed, Mike's fear was also growing. "Dax, we can't waste any more time. We need to find out more about Anton's location," Mike said, gesturing to Dax in the darkness. As Dax thought about this situation, a plan began to form in his mind. "We can go to an old friend's office. We might find some information there," he said. After saying this, they headed to the back exit of the old hangar. Anton's office was known to be a place filled with his criminal associates and dark connections. Dax believed they could learn where their enemy was hiding. Among his thoughts were Lena and Jake's situations. The desire to save them came above everything else. The place looked like a dark and abandoned building. When they entered through the door, a cold breeze greeted them. Dax advanced carefully, scanning the surroundings. "We need to be careful anywhere we go. Anton's men might be here," Mike whispered, squinting his eyes. Inside, it seemed like a place that hadn't been used in years. Old maps and a chart showing Anton's connections hung on the wall. Dax approached the chart and examined the details. "There's something here," he said. When Mike came over, he turned to Dax and asked, "What did you find?" "These are the places Anton does business. Maybe we can reach them," Dax said, pointing at the maps with his fingers. But just then, footsteps from outside caught Dax's attention. "Hide!" he whispered, and they quickly moved to the back room. As Dax heard his heartbeat, he sensed the enemy was approaching. The darkness inside kept them hidden, while his thoughts focused on forming a plan. Mike turned to Dax and said, "What are we going to do?" "2 men are coming." Dax bravely turned his eyes to Mike. "If these men are Anton's, we need to take them down." As the sounds outside grew closer, Dax's body tensed. "Get ready," he said, slowly opening the door to look outside. 2 armed men were waiting in front of the office. "These are Anton's closest men. We have to defeat them," he whispered. Dax took a deep breath to steady himself. "We're going on the attack. You approach from the left, I'll go from the right," he planned. Mike nodded, and both moved stealthily through the darkness toward their enemies. They felt their hearts racing, determined to win no matter what. Dax carefully crept through the side door and got behind the enemies. Mike threw an object to distract the enemy. As the enemies turned toward the sound, Dax moved quickly. He first took one down, and the other appeared in front of him. "This is your end," Dax said, attacking the enemy. As he took down the first enemy, he struggled to grab the second man's weapon. Mike intervened just in time and incapacitated the enemy. "Great job," Mike said as he approached Dax. "But we need to hurry. More men could come." As they examined the map of the enemies, they found locations Anton had marked recently. "We need to get out of here and find out where Anton is hiding," Dax said with determination. "We can't save Lena and Jake without stopping him." As they stepped outside, they opened their eyes wide and paid attention to their surroundings. "Where are we going?" Mike asked, observing the dark paths next to Dax. "We're heading toward the place where Anton hides his old materials. We should find a clue from there," Dax replied. Dax and Mike decided to pursue Anton without wasting any more time in this difficult struggle. Time was working against them, and the desire to save their loved ones was above all else. This final battle would reveal both Dax's determination and his warrior spirit. They were both ready to give everything in this fight. Chapter 8. As Dax and Mike made their way toward Anton's hideout, they felt the rising tension with every step. Dax carried a mix of anger and worry within him as he moved through the darkness of the night. Lena and Jake's lives were in Anton's hands, and he would never accept that. The gun he held tightly was a symbol of his determination. "Dax, when do we plan to get there?" Mike asked, scanning the surroundings. "There aren't many exits from this area. We need to be careful." Dax turned to Mike, a spark in his eyes. "Calm down. Everything will be fine. We will find them," he said. After moving silently for a while longer, a large warehouse emerged from the darkness. Dax saw the lights inside becoming more distinct. "This is it. Be careful," he whispered to Mike. Dax opened the door cautiously and stepped inside. As his eyes roamed the warehouse, he noticed something moving in the dark corners. His heart raced as Mike followed closely behind. The atmosphere inside was shrouded in tense silence. Dax moved instinctively, trying to guess where their enemies might be hiding. "It's too quiet here. We shouldn't draw too much attention," Mike said, stepping carefully. Dax approached him and whispered, "Something's going on outside. Can't you feel it?" At that moment, a noise was heard behind the warehouse door. Dax and Mike quickly hid in the shadows. Dax felt a stir in his heart. When the door opened, one of Anton's men stepped inside. Moving quickly, Dax threw a metal box to distract the enemy. When the box hit the ground and opened, it made a noise, drawing the enemy's attention. "Go," Dax said, signaling Mike. He quickly moved to neutralize the enemy. Mike tried to stay behind Dax and took down the enemy. "That was easy," Mike said, out of breath. Dax immediately checked the surroundings. "Our job isn't done yet. We need to keep going." After progressing a bit further, they found a door inside the warehouse. The door was made of metal and covered in rust. "There's something here. We need to open it," Dax said. He rolled up his sleeves to open the door. Mike was carefully watching the surroundings. When Dax pushed the door open, light poured in, illuminating their faces. Behind the door, they encountered a dark room. In the center of the room was a table covered with old maps and photographs. "Anton must be behind this," Dax said as he approached the table. "These might be clues about where Lena and Jake are being held." One photograph caught Dax's attention. It showed Lena and Jake tied up somewhere. Dax immediately showed the photo to Mike. "We need to take this. It could lead us to them," he said. But just then, footsteps were heard from outside. Dax instinctively pulled back. "Enemies are coming! We need to get out of here!" Dax and Mike tried to exit the room in a panic. Gunshots and shouts echoed outside. "What are we going to do?" Mike asked, looking worried. "We need to close the door. We have to hold them here," Dax said. They quickly shut the door and reinforced it with a few heavy objects. Turning to Mike, Dax said, "We need to buy them time. I won't leave without finding out where Lena and Jake are." Mike hesitated at this decision, but Dax's determination gave him courage. "All right, I'm coming with you. We need to save them." Dax moved forward without a moment's hesitation. "Now we need to make a plan. We have to use the information inside to find out where Anton is hiding," he said. "When we find him, we'll do everything we can to neutralize his enemies." Dax and Mike set off, making their final preparations to confront Anton. Though they faced a dark future, the desire to rescue ignited the courage within them, and they were determined to give their all. Chapter 9. As Dax and Mike moved toward the place where Anton was hiding, the dark night descended upon them like a cloak. The anger, anxiety, and determination within Dax combined to fill him with fire. The lives of Lena and Jake depended on the outcome of this final confrontation. When the moment of reckoning came, Dax took determined steps with unwavering will. Every street and corner they passed brought them closer to their enemies. "Dax, we need to be prepared for anything," Mike said, his eyes shining beside him. "This time, we can't afford to lose." They paused for a moment. Dax took a deep breath, trying to suppress the fear within him. "I know, Mike. When we find them, we need to know what to do," he replied. After a while, they arrived at the area where Anton was hiding. An old factory looked rusty and abandoned, but they knew that something was still going on inside. Dax stepped toward the dark entrance of the factory. "We need to be careful here. An attack could come at any moment," he said. Upon entering through the door, he heard the creaking of metal. Dax immediately pulled to the side, and Mike was right beside him. The interior of the factory was filled with a cold, dark atmosphere. "Let's keep our eyes open," Dax said, scanning the surroundings. Everything inside was quiet, but this silence was a harbinger of danger. Dax began to examine his surroundings. As his eyes carefully scanned every detail, he noticed movement in a corner. "Watch out," he shouted, but it was too late. Anton's men suddenly appeared and launched an attack. Dax reflexively drew his weapon and began to fire. Mike moved with him. As gunfire echoed, Dax and Mike began to fight against their enemies. Dax's only thought was the desire to rescue Lena and Jake. "We have to find them!" he shouted. As they quickly tried to incapacitate their foes, he heard Anton's laughter in the background. "Finding me was very easy, wasn't it?" Anton spoke mockingly as he stepped out from a dark corner. "But this will end here before it's too late." Dax turned to Anton with rage. "You will never succeed, Anton. Let them go." Anton noticed the determination in Dax's eyes. "Oh, Dax, your emotions are making you weak. Don't you see how selfish you are in chasing after them?" Dax ignored Anton's words. "I'm ready to fight for their lives. I won't leave here without seeing this through." With a feeling of an explosion inside him, Dax lunged at Anton. A struggle began between the two. While Dax deflected Anton's attacks, his mind was solely focused on Lena and Jake. Each blow strengthened his resolve. Finally, Dax managed to corner Anton. "This is where it ends," Dax said, breathless. "You will pay for all that you have done." Anton leaned back with a laugh. "Is that what you think? Fighting me will only lead you to lose more," he said. Just then, a noise was heard. When Dax turned around, he saw Lena and Jake. They were tied up, but still alive. "Dax!" Lena shouted, fear in her eyes. Dax felt a sense of relief in his heart. "Let them go, Anton," Dax said, turning back to Anton. But Anton held a gun behind the crowd and threatened Dax. "If you take one more step, you risk losing them." Dax did not succumb to despair. "I have to stop you," he whispered, filled with courage. "There's nowhere left for you to hide. We will do this together." As the tension inside rose, Dax made a maneuver to distract Anton. Suddenly, he attacked Anton, using the darkness around him. A struggle erupted between them. In the end, Dax incapacitated Anton, bringing him to the ground. "This is the end," Dax said, panting. He turned to Lena and Jake. "You're safe now." Mike joined them. "We arrived just in time," he said, smiling. Dax felt a moment of happiness as he embraced Lena and Jake. "Thank you," Lena said, her eyes filled with tears. "You saved us." Dax paused for a moment. "We are family. Above all, we are together," he replied. Outside, police sirens began to be heard. "We need to get out of here," Mike said excitedly. Dax looked at his family and friends. "We are free from every place we've hidden," he added, his eyes shining. As they exited through the factory door, Dax understood the value of every moment he had lived. The victory they had won had strengthened the bonds that held them together. Looking back, he saw a glimmer of hope emerge amidst all the dark moments. And this would mark a new beginning in Dax's life. Fate and find 8V.